Almost nobody has ever stood inside this cave. Not because it is hidden, and not because it is hard to reach. There is a road to it. There is a lift. There is a steel door with a lock. The air inside is around 58 degrees Celsius at nearly 100% humidity, and a human being who walks in without protection has roughly 10 minutes. And here is the part that makes this more than a list of extreme numbers. Nobody was ever supposed to see this place. It spent something like 500,000 years underwater in total darkness, sealed inside a mountain. The only reason human eyes ever landed on it is that a mining company happened to be pumping the water out of that mountain to get its silver. That gave us a window of about 15 years to look at the largest crystals ever found on Earth. That window is now closed, and I mean that literally, not poetically. The town is called Naica in the state of Chihuahua in northern Mexico. It is a mining town, and it has been for a very long time. Beneath it sits a mountain shot through with lead, zinc, and silver. And beneath that sits something that matters far more to this story: magma. Not close enough to be dangerous, but close enough to heat everything above it, which means the rock in that mountain is hot, and the groundwater inside it is hot. For over a century, miners dug into that mountain, and the deeper they went, the worse the conditions got. Not just heat, water. The mine sat below the water table, which means the tunnels wanted to flood constantly. The only reason the mine could operate at all was an enormous pumping operation running around the clock, hauling groundwater up and out so men could work down there. Hold on to that detail, because it is the hinge the whole story turns on. In 1910, miners broke into something strange, a chamber lined with blades of clear crystal, some of them a meter long, pointing in every direction like a room full of swords. They named it the Cave of Swords. It became mildly famous. People took specimens, and for 90 years, that was the most spectacular thing anyone had found under that mountain. Then, in April of 2000, two brothers working in the mine, Eloy and Javier Delgado, were driving a new tunnel about 300 meters down. They broke through into a void. What was inside is difficult to describe without sounding like exaggeration, so let me just give you the measurements. Beams of translucent crystal lying across each other at every angle, filling a chamber roughly 110 meters long. Not centimeters, meters. The largest of them is around 12 meters long and 4 meters thick and weighs somewhere in the region of 55 tons. A single crystal the size of a large tree that you could walk the length of. They are made of selenite, which is a transparent form of gypsum. And gypsum is not exotic. It is the same mineral in the plasterboard in your walls. This is ordinary material that has done something extraordinary, and we will come back to why in a moment. Because first, the cave has to be survived. When those miners broke through, they walked into an environment that is genuinely one of the most hostile places on the planet that is not underwater or on fire. Around 58 degrees Celsius, humidity so close to saturated that the air is effectively fog. And it is that combination, not the heat alone, that kills you. Your body has exactly one serious method of cooling itself, and that is evaporating sweat off your skin. In air that is already holding all the water it can hold, nothing evaporates. You sweat, and it just sits on you, doing nothing. So your core temperature starts to climb, and it does not stop. Then there is the second problem, which is worse and much less obvious. The air in there is hotter than you are. Every time you breathe in, that hot, saturated air enters your lungs, hits a slightly cooler surface, and gives up its moisture. Water condenses inside your lungs. You are drowning in extremely small amounts from the inside. The estimate people work with is around 10 minutes of useful function for an unprotected person. But that number is misleading in a dangerous way, because the failure is not physical first, it is cognitive. Long before you collapse, you get confused. You lose the ability to judge how bad your situation is. There are accounts from that cave of people needing to be told by someone else that it was time to leave, because they had stopped being able to make that call themselves. The mining company eventually put a steel door on the entrance. And I want to be careful here, because you will find a widely repeated story online about a man who got past that door and died inside. That story circulates without solid sourcing, and I am not going to present it as fact. What is not in dispute is that the environment itself is lethal on a timescale of minutes, and that the door was not decorative. So now the real question. How does ordinary plasterboard mineral grow into 55-ton beams? The answer is the most beautiful part of this story, and it comes down to a single number. That mountain is full of calcium sulfate, which exists in two forms. One is called anhydrite, which is stable in hot water. The other is gypsum, which is stable in cooler water. And the temperature at which one flips over into the other sits at roughly 58 degrees. Now here is what happened. The water filling that chamber, heated from below by the magma, sat just barely under that threshold. Not above it, not far below it, just under. Which meant the anhydrite in the surrounding rock was very slowly dissolving, and the dissolved material was very slowly rebuilding itself as gypsum on whatever gypsum was already there. At that temperature, this process is close to being not a process at all. It is unimaginably slow, and slowness is precisely what you need to make something enormous. If crystals grow quickly, you get billions of tiny ones. If they grow at a rate barely distinguishable from stillness, the few that exist just keep getting larger, atom by atom, for as long as the conditions hold. They held for something like 500,000 years. That is the actual miracle here, not the size, the stability. For 500,000 years, that chamber sat at almost exactly the same temperature, in the dark, completely still, while ice ages came and went overhead, and every species you have ever heard of appeared and evolved. A thermostat that never moved for longer than our species has existed. And then, in the 1900s, people arrived with pumps and dropped the water table, and the cave drained, which is the only reason we know it exists. What follows is one of the strangest field science operations of the last few decades. Starting in the mid-2000s, a research effort came together around the cave, run by a Mexican film and research group alongside an Italian caving team, pulling in geologists, biologists, and engineers from several countries. Their problem was not scientific. It was logistical. How do you keep a human being alive and functional inside that room for long enough to do anything useful? The answer was suits. Purpose-built, refrigerated suits, packed with ice, feeding cooled air to a respirator so that the person inside is breathing something their lungs can survive. The whole rig weighs around 20 kilograms, and wearing it, an explorer gets somewhere in the region of 45 minutes instead of 10. Now think about what 45 minutes actually means when you are dragging 20 kilos of ice through a chamber full of crystal. You cannot put your hand down to steady yourself, because the crystal edges are sharp and the surfaces are wet and slick. The floor is not floor. It is a crust of gypsum with gaps between blades that will swallow a leg. Camera equipment fogs instantly and then fails outright. Electronics die in that heat. Every single item that goes in has to be carried by a person who is on a countdown, and every item has to come back out on the same countdown. And that countdown is not a warning system. It is an estimate. The suits made the cave survivable, not safe. So the total amount of human time actually spent inside that chamber across every expedition, every film crew, every scientist, adds up to something remarkably small. Not years of study, hours. A handful of people in short bursts over about a decade, and everything humanity will ever know about the largest crystals on Earth had to fit inside those bursts. Which brings us to what they found in there, and it is not what anybody went looking for. Inside those crystals are tiny, sealed pockets of ancient liquid, trapped as the crystal grew around them. A team, led by a NASA astrobiologist, extracted material from those inclusions and reported finding microbial life inside. Not fossils, not traces, organisms that had been sealed in there in a dormant state for something on the order of tens of thousands of years, and that could be revived in a laboratory. Genetically, they did not closely match anything already known. I will add the honest caveat because it matters. Work like this always carries a serious risk of contamination, and results announced from a site that hostile invite skepticism from other scientists, which is exactly how the process is supposed to work. But the implication, if it holds, is enormous, and it has nothing to do with Mexico. It means life can shut itself down inside a mineral, in total darkness, with no food source we would recognize, and simply wait out a span of time longer than human civilization, which is the single most relevant fact you could possibly have when you start asking whether anything is alive under the surface of Mars or in the ocean beneath the ice of Europa. That is what was in there. A room that tells you what deep time does to matter, and a set of passengers that tell you what deep time does to life. And then it ended in the least dramatic way imaginable. In 2015, the mine had a serious flooding incident, and the company was unable to bring the water back under control. Operations were suspended. And when a mine stops, the pumps stop, because the pumps only ever existed to serve the mine. So the water came back, slowly, then completely. Within a couple of years, the cave of crystals was submerged again, back under the hot, mineral-rich solution that built it, in the dark, at the same temperature it has been for 500,000 years. There is no plan to go back in. Reopening that chamber would mean restarting an industrial pumping operation at enormous cost, and the ore is no longer worth it. So, unless the economics of that mountain change dramatically, no living person is going to stand in that room again. Which finally lets me answer the question in the title honestly. Nobody can give you a verified count of how many people have been inside. Miners were in there. Scientists were in there. Film crews were in there. What is true, and I think more impressive than any number, is that the entire human presence in the largest crystal chamber ever discovered adds up to a few dozen hours, spread across a few years by people wearing ice. And I find the ending strangely comforting, which is not usually where I land. We did not conquer that cave. We did not preserve it, or open it to visitors, or build a walkway through it. We got a brief, accidental look at something that was never arranged for us, took our measurements and our samples, and then the door closed on its own terms. The crystals are back in the exact conditions that grew them, which means the process may simply have resumed. They might be very slightly larger now than when we left. 500,000 years of absolute stillness, interrupted by about 15 years of humans with pumps and cameras, and then stillness again. On the timescale that room operates on, we were a flicker.